Calling you a monster who deserves life imprisonment might not be an unfair exaggeration.
Those were stern words of Judge David M. Andre to cold-blooded mother Gail Eastwood Ritchie, cracking one of the most notorious cold cases in the region after 26 years, known as the Geauga's Child case. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Today, we're taking you through every twist and turn of this heart-wrenching case, from the moment of discovery to the shocking confession that left even seasoned detectives in disbelief. It all began on a cold, snowy morning in March 1993. Two newspaper carriers, Cheryl Jenkins and Wendy Sweeney, were on their usual delivery route along Sidley Road in Thompson Township, Geauga County. The area, remote and blanketed by woods, was eerily quiet, perfect for concealing sinister stuff. As they drove by, something on the roadside caught their eye. At first, they thought it was a discarded doll. But driven by gnawing curiosity, they took a closer look and horrifyingly realized this was no doll. It was a human baby, lifeless and abandoned. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small Ohio community. The baby's tiny, fragile body had been stuffed into a garbage bag. His tiny arm and leg were missing, likely torn away by animals, and a remnant of his umbilical cord clung to his lifeless form, a haunting reminder of the life that had been cruelly taken. Cheryl and Wendy, overwhelmed with grief and horror, immediately called the police. The sheer brutality of the act ignited a burning desire for justice that would not be easily extinguished.
Wish we could have found it alive. Just hope they find who did it. I hope they're punished.
When detectives arrived on the scene, they were confronted with a gruesome sight. The baby's body had been subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The detectives could only speculate about what had happened.
You know, when I got there, it was obvious that this is a newborn baby that's laying in the middle of the road. It looked like there was a tire track over it, like somebody had driven down the road and actually it over.
Was this the act of a desperate, frightened mother, or something even more sinister? Initially, they feared that the baby's mother might have met a similar fate. This grim possibility drove them to comb through the surrounding woods, searching for any clues that could shed light on the tragedy.
Any clothing, body parts, any kind of evidence that may have been left inadvertently at the scene by whoever left the baby here.
Despite their thorough search, the woods yielded no additional evidence, leaving the detectives with more questions than answers. As the infant's body underwent autopsy, a disturbing thought began to take root in their minds. Could this horrific act have been committed by someone within the baby's own family? Geauga County Sheriff George Red Simmons made a public appeal for information. He described the baby as Caucasian, less than a week old, and who had been in the elements for at least 12 hours before being found. He issued an urgent plea, his voice tinged with desperation, calling on anyone with even the slightest bit of information to come forward and help identify the baby boy. The autopsy revealed even more harrowing details. The baby was estimated to be just 1 to 3 days old when he was abandoned, and a standard lung float test confirmed that the baby had been born alive. But despite their best efforts, investigators couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of death. The most haunting question remained unanswered: had the infant already perished before being abandoned? Or did he succumb to the brutal cold after being left exposed to the elements? Despite the public's outrage and the community's determination to bring the culprit to justice, the investigation hit several roadblocks. Tips came pouring in, but each lead ended in a dead end. From the outset, the investigation was complex and challenging. Detectives canvassed the area, interviewing residents, and following up on every possible lead. Hospitals within a large radius were contacted to check for records of recent births, but nothing seemed to match the timeline or the description of the baby. Law enforcement agencies statewide were alerted, and a hotline was set up, urging anyone with information to come forward. However, the mystery deepened with each passing day. Thomas Dewey, the lead homicide detective assigned to the case, meticulously examined 34 individuals and issued 24 subpoenas. He even explored the theory that the baby might have been part of a larger criminal enterprise, such as illegal adoptions or child trafficking. But as time passed, and no concrete evidence emerged, the case grew colder. It became a haunting enigma, one that would linger in the minds of everyone involved for decades. The emotional toll on the detectives was immense. This was more than just a case, it became a personal mission for those involved. The thought that someone could abandon a helpless infant in such a manner was almost too much to bear. The community, though grieving, came together to ensure that the baby was never forgotten. They named him Geauga's Child and raised funds for his burial. During the funeral, detectives discreetly stationed themselves in the church parking lot, covertly recording everyone who came to pay their respects, hoping the somber event might unearth new leads. On the tombstone, the locals inscribed a touching poem that honored his short life. Geauga's child lies here now in safety, just too late to save his life, too late to make things right, but not too late to teach us all to love and cherish life. Denied a family in life. The baby finally found a home in death, embraced by a community that would never forget him. The child was laid to rest, but the case refused to be. The detectives, again, discreetly planted a camera at the child's grave, hoping to catch the culprit sneaking back to pay their respects. For months and even years, the camera silently watched as residents gathered to remember the baby. But the camera's relentless gaze never captured the moment they longed for. No one ever came to claim responsibility. Detective Thomas Dewey even considered insights from Nancy Meyer, a psychic investigator, in his relentless pursuit of the truth.
Very meek personality. She's no longer with the man that forced her into this. I think her big problem in coming forward is she feels that she would be arrested.
To test the validity of Nancy's insights, detectives had to bide their time for over 2 decades. But right now, the investigation seemed frozen, with no new leads in sight. In 2005, Detective Dewey retired from the sheriff's office, reluctantly stepping away from the case that had consumed much of his career. Though he often visited the gravesite, he had to pass the torch to a new generation of investigators. Detective Don Seaman took over, determined to continue the pursuit of justice for Geauga's child. Fast forward to 2018. By this time, advances in forensic technology, especially forensic genealogy, had begun to solve some of the most baffling cold cases across the country. Inspired by these developments, Detective Don Seaman saw an opportunity to finally bring answers to the mystery that had haunted the community for so long. Detective Seaman, with the support of the Geauga County Sheriff's Office, reopened the case with a focus on using DNA evidence and genealogical research to identify the baby and potentially his parents. It was a long shot, but after 26 years of dead ends, it was a chance worth taking. The first step was to extract a DNA profile from the baby's remains. Thankfully, the medical examiner had preserved tooth buds from the infant, and these proved to be a viable source of genetic material. The DNA was then uploaded to GeneMatch, an online database that allows individuals to trace their ancestry and connect with distant relatives. The hope was that this DNA would match with someone in the database, leading investigators to a relative of the baby. However, it wasn't an easy process. For months, Detective Seaman and his team painstakingly worked through the results, building an extensive family tree that included over 1,400 individuals scattered across the globe. Each connection, no matter how distant, was carefully examined. The team worked tirelessly, piecing together the intricate web of relationships that could lead them to the baby's parents. Finally, after months of meticulous work, the breakthrough they had been waiting for arrived. The DNA led them to a man named Vernon Holden, living in Omaha, Nebraska. But the DNA he had submitted wasn't his, it was his father-in-law's. Luckily, Vernon eagerly volunteered to help build a more detailed family tree for his father-in-law. Armed with new leads generated from the expanded family tree, detectives interviewed several new potential suspects, each one bringing them closer to the truth. Then, a breakthrough emerged, a clue that led them back to Sidley Road, the very place where Geauga's child was discovered. An extended family member recounted a visit to her uncle's home on Sidley Road during Thanksgiving in November 1992. She vividly remembered his pregnant girlfriend being there. But the baby was never born, or at least, she never heard anything more about it after that day. This chilling recollection reignited the investigation, suggesting that the answers they had been searching for might have been hiding in plain sight all along. By early 2019, the detectives' perseverance paid off. They discovered that Geauga's child was the grandchild of one of 10 siblings. There was only one living sibling left, Harvey Eastwood, who resided in Lyndhurst, Ohio, just 30 miles from Geauga County. The situation was complicated, though. Harvey had been adopted. Harvey had 2 daughters, neither of whom had any ties to the area. In fact, he was completely unfamiliar with Geauga County, making it seem unlikely that Geauga's child would be connected to him. After chatting with Harvey for about an hour, the conversation seemed to be winding down, and the detectives were preparing to leave. But just as they were about to step out the door, Harvey casually mentioned a bombshell info: his children and grandchildren had met their spouses at a camp called Camp Koinonia. It was located just a mile from where the baby had been found. Intrigued, they asked Harley if either of his daughters had ever been involved with a man of foreign descent.
Your son-in-laws, do they have any foreign descent?
Oh, Mark has Lebanese descendants.
Mark Ritchie, the husband of Harvey's older daughter Gail, became the unexpected focus of the investigation. Gail, who was 49 at the time, was happily married with 3 grown children of her own. In a bid to confirm their suspicions, they decided to collect DNA samples from Harvey and his wife, Nancy. The results, which arrived a few days later, confirmed what they had hardly dared to believe: Harvey and Nancy were indeed the grandparents of Geauga's child, a baby they had never known existed. After 26 years of unanswered questions, the mystery of Geauga's child was finally beginning to unravel. The time had come for detectives to confront Gail Eastwood Ritchie, the woman who, until now, had lived quietly in Euclid, Ohio. On May 21, 2019, the detectives arrived at Gail's residence, ready to uncover the last secrets of this long-buried tragedy. They had set up a hidden camera in a coffee cup opposite her house. After waiting for her husband to go to work, they decided to approach her.
Yeah? Hey, how you doing? Good. Listen, Geauga County Sheriff's Office. We just want to see if we can talk to you for a couple of minutes.
Well, yeah.
Okay. You have any idea what we want to talk to you about? Because I kind of think you might.
Well, my parents said that you were at their house.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think that's about?
It was about a baby.
Yeah. What about?
A baby that was left.
Mm-hmm. We don't know what was going on at the time. We don't want to speculate either, okay? So I don't think you want us to speculate. We're not here to arrest you, okay? We are here to take your DNA, okay? And we would like for you to tell us your side of the story, because we'd like to know. As of right now, you're not under arrest. You're not going to be arrested today. But we want to know what was going on. I think after 26 years, it's time.
She was calm, almost unnervingly so, as they explained why they were there. There were no tears, no signs of fear, reactions they had come to expect in such a situation. After collecting the necessary DNA swabs to confirm Gail's connection to the baby, the detectives knew it was time to dig deeper. Gail was brought to the Geauga County Sheriff's Office for questioning, where they hoped to finally unravel the dark and twisted mystery that had haunted them for nearly 3 decades. Gail eventually confessed to the detectives. During the summer of 1992, at the age of 22, she was living with her parents and younger sister while dating Mark Ritchie, who would later become her husband and was a few years older than her. Gail did not know she was pregnant with Mark's child because she still had menstrual cycles. Her period stopped just 3 months before the baby was due. That was when she realized the shocking reality. Instead of confiding in anyone, Gail kept her mouth shut. Her weight, which was over 200 pounds, allowed her to hide the pregnancy. One afternoon in March 1993, she was home alone in Shaker Heights. Suddenly, she felt an overwhelming urge to push. The moment came without warning, catching her off guard in that quiet house.
The next thing I knew, I was giving birth to a baby in the toilet.
Overwhelmed and terrified, she placed the newborn in a garbage bag. Then she methodically cleaned the bathroom to erase any trace of what had happened. With cold determination, she then placed the tiny, fragile body in the trunk of her car, concealing the evidence of her darkest secret. Remarkably, she continued with the rest of her day as if nothing had happened. About a week passed. Gail drove to Camp Koinonia to attend a church youth group outing. The baby was still in the trunk of her car. She then drove a few miles to the remote Thompson Township to abandon the baby on a desolate road.
I got in my car and just drove. I don't know where I ended up. And I just ended up stopping on a road. I don't know which road. And I took the bag out of the trunk. And I laid it in the woods.
Was anybody with you in the car?
No. No, I was by myself.
About how far off the road do you remember you went? Like with the bag, like how far from the roadway you would have went? Or was there anything specific by there?
I remember stopping on the road. There was a lot of snow. I do remember a lot of snow. And I walked in as far as I could and I left the bag.
The report revealed something she had long buried: the baby had been born alive. This was no longer just a secret. Even worse, Gail had the intention of abandoning the baby from the start and never looked at her own baby. When pressed on why she hadn't confided in anyone, Gail's response was simple yet deeply unsettling. She was afraid to lose her family and her boyfriend-turned-husband, Mark. While Gail was at the Geauga County Sheriff's Office, other detectives made their way to Mark's home, who was unaware of the storm brewing around him. After carefully walking Mark through the labyrinth of the investigation, the detectives not only confirmed his genuine shock and his lack of involvement in the tragic death of Geauga's child, but also received another bombshell.
Today we met with Gail, and Gail said that our detectives that she's talked to today are the only two she's ever talked to about birthing a child in Shaker Heights, putting it into a garbage bag, and driving it to Geauga County. So
my wife said this?
Mm-hmm. So
That's news to me.
At some point in June of 1992, or roundabouts, you guys got together and had, she got pregnant. And for whatever reason, she kept it from you. And in March of 1993, she gave birth to that baby. And for whatever reason that we're still trying to figure out, she didn't tell anybody, and she left that baby in Geauga County.
What do you... wow. I have no... I don't know what to say.
Mark revealed that he had been aware of one of Gail's pregnancies, but shockingly, this had occurred before 1993, before Geauga's child was born. Gail had later told him she had suffered a miscarriage. This revelation raised unsettling questions. Was Gail hiding even more secrets? Could Geauga's child have been just one of multiple abandoned children? The implications were chilling. Back at the Geauga County Sheriff's Office, Gail remained under interrogation. Now in a blunt manner, the detectives reminded Gail that her DNA would be entered into CODIS, the national database for storing and comparing DNA profiles from countless sources. This was her final chance, her last opportunity to unearth any secrets she had buried before the full weight of the evidence came crashing down on her.
But you know and I know this isn't the only time. That there's more times that this has happened. And now is the time that you need to tell us about those, Gail. How many other times has this happened?
One other time.
One other time? And when was that? Was it before or after this child?
Before.
Before.
It turned out Geauga's child was not her first victim. Another innocent life had been lost to her desperate actions. She admitted that in 1991, at just 20 years old, she had gone into labor at Mark's rental house in Geauga County, Ohio. Overwhelmed by fear and secrecy, she abandoned that child in the same cold, calculated manner.
He gave birth to it in the toilet.
Is it a boy or a girl?
I don't know.
You don't.
And I never...
You didn't want to know?
I never looked.
Okay.
I don't know.
What happened after you gave birth to the child?
I did the same thing. Put it in a garbage bag.
And what did you do with the garbage bag?
I left it.
What do you mean you left it? What does that mean, Gail?
I took it and left it over by medical buildings in Euclid.
Where did you leave it exactly?
There's a road called Brush Road. Goes up behind very tall medical buildings that are there. And I just left it over in the tall grass.
Kind of like field area you left in the tall grass?
Yeah.
What time of year was this?
Summer. I think it was summer.
Summer, and you think you're 21? Do you remember what year it would have been?
As Gail's confession unfolded, more about her life came to light. Gail, who had been raised in a strict Baptist household, revealed that she had lived in constant fear of her father's judgment. Her father had made it clear that having children out of wedlock was something he would never accept. Gail's fear of his reaction was so overwhelming that it drove her to make decisions that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She described her life at home as cold and oppressive, with little discussion at family dinners other than her father's rants about moral conduct. This environment, according to Gail, left her with low self-esteem and a crippling fear of disappointing her family. Gail's psychological state during these years was a key element of the investigation and later, the trial. It became clear that Gail had been living a double life, outwardly a devoted daughter and later a mother, while internally struggling with deep-seated fears and guilt. Her inability to confide in anyone about her pregnancies, not even the father of the children, revealed the extent of her isolation. This isolation, coupled with the fear of losing everything she held dear, ultimately led to the tragic decisions she made. Her confession also revealed a chilling pattern. The fact that she had abandoned not one, but two newborns, suggested that this was not a momentary lapse in judgment but rather a calculated attempt to avoid the consequences of her actions. The first child, she claimed, was abandoned near medical buildings in Cleveland, wrapped in a garbage bag just like the baby found in Geauga County. However, despite an extensive search, the remains of this first child were never found. Despite the gravity of this revelation, Gail was allowed to return home for the time being. However, before she left, the detectives issued a stern warning. They cautioned her about potential threats to her safety. After 26 years of relentless pursuit for justice, the community finally knew who was responsible for the tragic death of Geauga's child, and this was not the kind of notoriety Gail could simply walk away from. The once hidden truth was now out in the open, and the consequences of her actions were closing in fast. Gail's brief taste of freedom was short-lived. On June 6, 2019, the law finally caught up with her. She was taken into custody and charged with the murder of Geauga's child, her long-hidden secrets now exposed to the world. However, Gail did not face charges related to the 1991 case due to the absence of physical evidence. When confronted with the murder charges for Geauga's child, she pleaded not guilty. On March 31, 2022, the intense trial began with the defense arguing the baby had been stillborn and Gail's actions were those of a frightened, desperate young girl. They painted a picture of Gail as a victim of her circumstances.
She didn't do anything to purposely cause the death. This was a stillborn baby. And under those circumstances, your verdict can only be not guilty. There's no description, first of all, of where he took these tissue samples from in the lung.
Right. Correct.
And there's only one lung here, right?
Yes.
So if in a typical or routine situation, you would want tissue slides from both lungs.
Ideally, yes.
And so that's another example of what would be either a vague and or incomplete report.
True.
Gail even cried during the trial when the defense delved into her troubled home life. She had endured years of verbal abuse by her own father. This toxic environment had left Gail crippled by fear and burdened with low self-esteem, driving her to make the desperate decision to abandon her baby. They argued that her actions were those of a deeply frightened woman who saw no other way out. However, the prosecution had a different story to tell. They argued that Gail's actions were not the result of panic but of cold calculation. The prosecution presented evidence that suggested Gail had planned the abandonment. They highlighted the fact that Gail had not sought help during her pregnancies, nor had she taken any steps to ensure the safety of her babies. Instead, she had methodically hidden the pregnancies and discarded the newborns like trash, abandoning him without a shred of humanity or remorse. The prosecution also pointed out Gail's lack of remorse during her interrogation, noting that she referred to her baby as it, showing no sign of maternal instinct or humanity. Moreover, the prosecution delved into Gail's life in the years following the abandonment of her children. They uncovered that Gail had gone on to live a seemingly normal life. She got married, raised other children, and was an active member of her community. This contrast between her ordinary life and the horrific acts she committed added a chilling layer to the case. It raised uncomfortable questions about how someone could compartmentalize such dark secrets and continue living as if nothing had happened. Adding to the damning evidence, the prosecution revealed that Gail had confided in her boss, Colleen Rode, at the Noreen Londrigan School of Dance in Mayfield, where she worked as a receptionist. 2 weeks before her arrest, Gail admitted she was in trouble, though she withheld the grim specifics. This admission eerily coincided with the moment investigators secured her DNA sample, suggesting that Gail knew her time was running out. She was fully aware of her guilt and the looming consequences of her actions, yet still sought to downplay the horror of what she had done. On April 4, 2022, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. 51-year-old Gail Eastwood Ritchie was found guilty of murder. More than a month later, on May 24, 2022, Gail stood before the judge once more, this time to face her fate. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The swift decision reflected the gravity of her crimes, echoing through the courtroom with finality. As the reality of her sentence settled in, Judge David M. Andre delivered a final, stern message, words that would linger as she was led away to begin her sentence. It was the closing chapter of a case that had haunted the community for decades, and the beginning of a new, darker reality for Gail.
Unable to face and address your own problems and the unwanted consequences your pregnancy might cause, in my opinion, you took the easy way out. You coldly and efficiently eliminated your problem by disposing of the only one who couldn't defend himself. He couldn't yell at you or berate you like you feared your father would. He couldn't leave you or break your heart like your boyfriend might. So I truly struggle to accept the explanation that you were young and afraid and alone. Maybe the first time those factors might explain your conduct, but not the second time. I believe you knew exactly how you could solve your problem with an unwanted pregnancy when Geauga's child came along because you had done it before. Calling you a monster who deserves life imprisonment might not be an unfair exaggeration. What I know is this: your wrongful efforts to conceal what happened in February 1993 did buy you 29 years of normal life where you got the chance to get married, raise children, and do some good works. But ultimately you gained that time on the back of a helpless infant whose body you concealed in the woods. Ironically, Geauga's child did more for you than you ever did for him, probably.
The public reaction to the verdict was mixed. While many were relieved that justice had finally been served for Geauga's child, others were left grappling with the deeper implications of the case. How could a woman, who by all outward appearances was a loving wife and mother, commit such unspeakable acts? The community struggled to reconcile the image of Gail they knew with the cold, calculating woman described in court. For the community of Geauga County, the case left deep scars. Cheryl Jenkins, one of the women who discovered the baby, spoke of the lasting impact the tragedy had on her life.
I always think about him. I've never forgot that day. I mean, it's burned in my memory. Every step of that day. Dropped that kid on him on a doorstep, or done something with him, taken him to a church. For me, it stayed with me all my life, and Wendy, it stayed with her all of her life because she couldn't have children.
But even as the community sought closure, the case left behind unanswered questions and unresolved pain. The memory of Geauga's child, and the knowledge that there had been another child who was never found, haunted those who had been involved in the investigation. For them, justice had been served, but the emotional toll would last a lifetime. This case forces us to confront difficult questions about accountability and responsibility. Was Gail truly a helpless woman driven to a desperate act by fear and isolation, or did she knowingly choose the path of least resistance? The jury's decision suggests that they believed the latter, but the questions remain. How do we judge someone who has lived with such a terrible secret for so long? And what does this case tell us about the pressures and expectations placed on women, particularly in strict, judgmental environments? Gail's case also highlights the importance of mental health and the need for better support systems for those in difficult situations. If she had been able to seek help, or if she had felt that she could confide in someone, perhaps these tragedies could have been avoided. We want to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you believe Gail was a victim of her circumstances, or do you think she made a calculated decision to abandon her children? Share your thought in the comments below. And if there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your suggestions in the comments section. For more gripping true crime stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.